Hello everybody, Bruce Mackenthun with Bruce Mackenthun Does It All. Today we're going to show you a video on how to stain your deck properly. Showing you anywhere from the sanding, the different types of sanders we use, to different tools that I use to actually apply the stain on the deck for the different parts of the deck. One of the things you'll need to know with staining a deck is it's very important on how you prepare it to take the stain. I was licensed by a stain brand for a little while before they stopped that program, but I had to go through a course and learn the different parts of how the wood actually has little pores in it, and the proper way to use your sandpaper or pressure washing or a combination of the two. And if you use chemicals, you have to make sure that you get those chemicals out and off of the wood so that your stain is properly able to get into those pores and absorb into the wood, so that your stain will last longer than if you don't do the right process. So hopefully the video will help you learn the process and what I do, and I've had customers call me back usually 2 to 3 years down the road before I hear back from them that they'd like to get their deck stained again. So one of the things for the tools that I use, you see it shortly in the video. Here's a closer up look. This is one of the most important things. This is a paint grade venting mask. This is gonna stop the really bad chemicals that are in stained products. When you're putting the stain on, those fumes are really strong. If you have a good quality product, you're gonna want to make sure that you protect yourself, so you don't end up harming yourself, and it could even be dangerous on your drive home. You could end up, or if you are at home and you plan on going out that night, it actually can really affect you. So make sure you wear proper protection, and hopefully you'll learn something. Enjoy the video. Make sure you subscribe, and hopefully you give me a thumbs up.
Mackenthun Does It All. Today we're working on staining a deck, restaining a deck I should say. Yesterday we pressure washed everything. I didn't need to show you that. You take your pressure washer. The biggest key when you're pressure washing is you want to start at one end and go all the way to the other side instead of going partially way across the board, because you'll end up leaving marks where you stop pressure washing and then you start again. So you want to start on one end, work your way all the way to the side, and then go back all the way across again. So just keep going all the way back and forth. Now that that's done, we've let it dry out for the day. Today we're going to sand everything, get it cleaned up as best we can. This deck has had a lot of coats of stain on it, so I already told the homeowner there's some things you just can't do. Most of it will come up, but there's going to be some that just gets kind of stuck in the grains of the wood, and it's just not going to come out unless you replace the boards. And once you do that, those boards replaced are going to look a little different once you finish staining everything, because they're going to be a look like a different color, even though it'll be the exact same stain. So let's take a look. Alright, so after you pressure wash, and we do this without any chemicals when we pressure wash, because I don't like to use chemicals on everything, because then you got to make sure you rinse the chemicals off good enough so the stain sticks like it's supposed to. So I prefer to sand everything after I get done with the pressure washing the next day. Now this deck, I've already screwed all the screws down, and I sanded this post. As you can see, I have most of the stain off of that. I'm going to hit these ends and inside parts with a smaller sander, like a Dremel type tool, to try and get that cleaned up more, but we're not going to get all of that off. The same with these face boards. That's not all going to come off, but a lot of it will, and once you put the stain on, you're going to notice that, but that's what happens on some older decks unless you really grind it down, but it's not really good to do that either. Now the sanding, we do that with a 60 to 80 grit sanding paper. Sometimes I'll use the 60 grit when there's a lot of the stain left over, just to help get it ground down, because you're going to have to take away more of the wood surface to get it down. So I will come back, we'll do a little sanding here. This is my palm sander that I use. I like going with this size because when you're on the board, these are 5.5 inch wide boards, so they're called 1 by 6s. So when you use this, I can go over, and then if the board is cupped, you can turn the sander back and forth like that to make sure you're getting through it. If I just rented a great big disc sander, you're gonna grind down a whole lot of the board to try and make them all even, because every time you come up to the edge, it's usually a little higher on the outsides of the boards than it is on the middle. Sometimes they're cupped the other way, but either way you end up missing spots, and then you'd have to grind down so much you end up going over all the screws and you tear up your sand paper. So we're not replacing any boards, because if you do replace them, they end up looking like a different color. So I recommend, if you have to replace more than 2 boards, you just recommend that they replace all of them or go with something else, because it will look different. And unless you go with a solid coat stain, which I never recommend on a deck, because the deck will rot out really fast. It does make it look pretty for a little bit, but it just traps the moisture inside the board. So we always use a semi-transparent stain. That works the best, and you have to make sure it's not like a Behr semi-transparent, because the Behr tends to label stuff as semi-transparent, but it's not. You can't see the grains when you're done putting the coating on, other than if they're actually raised up, then you can see it. But a true semi-transparent, you're able to see the grains of the wood after you've put the stain on, and it doesn't make a shiny coat. When you're all done staining a deck, if you've done it properly, it should be kind of a dull finish, but when it rains, it will beat up the water will beat up on the board. And that's also how I tell my customers, when it's time to re-stain your deck, typically after 2 to 3 years, with the stain that I use, the PPG, formerly known as Sickens brand, SRD, I found that to work really well. Haven't had any complaints. So I'm gonna get at it. So when you're sanding a deck, or really anything, you always want to make sure you're wearing protective goggles, something you can pull over your face, cover your nose and your mouth, because here's an example of how much dust is created when you sand. And that's just the dust that gets pulled into the little air holes at the bottom of your sander. If you have this type where it captures a lot of the sawdust, so all them particles you do not want to get into your lungs. So this is what I wear for protection: sunglasses, face mask. It also protects you from the sun. Little ear protection so my hearing doesn't go bad on me. I always wear a hat. That way, when my no hair doesn't protect me, my hat always does if I run into something. So it's not for big crashes and things like that, but when you're standing up underneath a deck or something, it definitely saves you from a trip to the hospital. This is what it looks like the way I go around these 2x2 spindles. The edge. there you go. The camera's getting pretty dusty from all the little particles. So you try to get a lot of that off. So when you're done, you've got a much smoother surface ready for accepting the stain. Here's my tool. Getting into some of the tight spots. So you can see it's going to fit right in there. I got one more tool that's even smaller that'll fit into those little gaps, but I always do that one last. Alright, it's all sanded. This deck took longer than others, but a lot more of the old stain is off, so the boards are going to look in a lot better shape because I took more time on the sanding part. There's still some places that you're just not going to get it all off because there's 10-year-old deck or older. Anyways, so I'll come back tomorrow because it may sprinkle a little tonight. Even if I had time, I wouldn't have put stain on it tonight, so we'll come back tomorrow and get it all stained up. Okay, we're back to stain the deck today. I've got a few tools I'd like to show you that make it a lot easier when you're staining your deck. So check them out. Again, Bruce Mackenthun does it all. So the first tool, which I already use, when you're staining, you always want to put stuff back in a bag, and then you can Ziploc it closed because then the air doesn't get to it so it doesn't dry out. But I use a tool like this with the little foam on the end to get in between these joints that are close to the house. Anything that you don't want to get stain on other things, you use a tool like that. Now here's the biggest thing that somebody told me one time is when you're staining, you go get one of these. It's about an inch, a little over an inch thick, and then they've got them in different sizes. I like to get them just a little smaller than what the deck boards are. So I've got that one. This one's a 6-inch. The trouble is with the 6-inch is it'll fit your board but a little more. But when you go to try and put it inside the can to dip your stain in, it usually hits the edges a lot, and it curls the bristles on the brush, and then you end up getting stain in places you don't want it. So try to avoid getting too big of a thing unless you're using a 5-gallon stain bucket. But if you're using a 1-gallon bucket, which I ended up using on most decks, this is a 16 by 16. 2 cans should cover it with the wood spindles. If it didn't have the wood spindles, you might be able to get away with 1 can, but usually you want to do 2 because different boards absorb more wood than others. So, but 1 dip of this and I'll be able to cover probably the whole length of 1 board because it holds so much stain. And then I have this here tool, screws into the brush, so then you're able to just wipe back and forth while you're standing up so you don't get a sore back. But right now I'm doing the railing. You can see the difference. This side has been stained, and you see it's not shiny. If you have a shiny finish when you're done staining, you're not using the right kind of stain, because if you've prepared the wood properly, it's going to absorb into the wood, kind of make itself one. If you got a shiny surface, it doesn't allow moisture to breathe through, so you want to have the right kind of stain. So you can see I was able to do a lot with one dip of the brush because it holds a lot of stain. Now I've been doing this with one hand, so that's why I'm not as accurate, because I'm trying to get this recorded for you people. But I'm going to put my mask back on so I don't have to breathe in these fumes. Alright, it's all done. There's a little bit of wet looking up there because I just put that on. That'll absorb into the board. So just like that. So you probably have 2 to 4 hours in pressure washing on your decks, depending on what their size is and if they have spindles. Sanding them off, boy, that can be, this one probably was about 6 to 8 hours with the railings. But putting the new stain on, if you've got the right tools, it's just a matter of probably 3 to 4 hours, maybe less if you don't have the spindles to deal with. But I know I got the deck, just the decking itself, that took less than an hour to put that down. Anyways, BruceDoesItAll.com.